Hey folks, welcome back to the Mac and Mike show. I'm Mac and he's Mike. Of course, you know that because if you're visiting here, you know which is which. But at any rate, Mike and I talked about a number of things today. And again, we're not together in person, which always makes for a better show, I think, because we sit around talking for half an hour before we turn on the camera to kind of get a sense of what we want to talk about. Today, we didn't do that because we're remote. And we've really kind of talked about a couple of different things. And so we'll probably go with one of those. We're not entirely certain what we're talking about, but it's going to be interesting. A number of multiple topics, probably. And Mike, do you have something we want to start off with in particular?
Well, the first thing you mentioned was the gerrymandering, and of course, some of the other things on the list were the strike by the Israelis on the hospital, Trump selling 3,350 extended range attack missiles to Ukraine through Europe, and then I mentioned Pete Hegseth did away with those Chinese guys working in the Pentagon's cloud server.
Well, I mentioned the gerrymandering thing because obviously one of the stories of the past couple of weeks has been the state of Texas trying to redraw their lines, which is typically or usually only done after a census is done. Um, of course, the state of Texas has had a huge influx of new residents, and most of those being people that have come here into the state, into this country illegally. But it has plussed up the Hispanic population quite a bit. And I think what they were trying to do in Texas was redraw the lines to give uh, recognition that there are more people living in some of these districts than have been in the past. Of course, because they're politicians and because they're smart, they're attempting to redraw the lines in ways in which they think will give the Republicans, because it is a Republican-controlled state, an advantage in the upcoming election. Now, that's pretty much an unvarnished kind of those are the facts. But what has gone on afterwards has been somewhat crazy. I mean, people all over the country, specifically many Democratic leaders, are just, I mean, just beating up the state of Texas, lambasting them for changing the lines because they think they're doing it for political reasons. And, it's one of those pot kettle black things, the state of New York, the state of Illinois, the state of California have done these kinds of things dramatically in the past. Now, the state of California has a policy where a nonpartisan, non-political, if you can believe that it's nonpartisan or non-political, independent commission draws the lines in California. Well, the state legislature in California just passed, and I believe Gavin Newsom has or will sign, that they can now have their own partisan commission rather than the nonpartisan commission drawing lines, which was overwhelmingly supported by the people in the state of California. So the hilarious thing to me was, yes, Texas is doing this. Excuse me. No, Texas isn't the only one doing it. Many of the largely Democratic states have been doing this for years. You have a comment, Mike?
Not really. I think, I watch the news regularly, so I guess I shouldn't assume everybody understands that, but that is the facts. Um, we went through it here in Pennsylvania some years back, and people had a lot to say about that. I don't know. It's going to go on. What was Charles Krauthammer's old saying? Things will go on until they can no longer go on.
Yeah.
So it'll be kind of a tit for tat. But because the Democrats have already done the majority of the gerrymandering, if Republican states start doing it, I think it'll overwhelm the number of gerrymandering Democrat states that try and compensate. We'll see over time.
Well, you
I I,
mentioned,
I hope it works out for Republicans because I mean we're the adults in the room. Let's face it. Not all Republicans are perfect by any stretch. I mean, I even like John Fetterman. I could sit down and have a beer with him, but he votes with Democrats 95% of the time. So even though I would probably like him personally, he doesn't vote the way I believe. And So I don't know if Trump's going to be of any success. We've got to have a bigger majority. Here we're coming up on what? The big budget decision. We need 60 Republicans. We're going to have to do a lot of compromising in the Senate because we don't have 60 Republican senators. So it's
Yeah.
going to be a mess again.
Well, you mentioned Pennsylvania, you mentioned Fetterman. I'll just make two comments. One, um, when the last redistricting was done in Pennsylvania, the Republicans had a majority, but the governor had a individual from a college and university who redrew the lawns, and the state legislature, where the law righteously puts the responsibility for drawing these lines, state legislature was overrode by the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, choosing the plan that the Democrats favored, which led to the eventual defeat of several Republicans, both in the state House of Representatives and state Senate, as well as in our national level at the United States House of Representatives. So, and the justices, we have a 9-member Supreme Court, 7 of which are Democrat, and I think 3 or 4 of them are up for reelection. They don't do a reelection for a justice. They do a retention vote. Should this person be kept for retention or not? And overwhelmingly, we usually vote yes. In this case, at least Wecht, who is an absolute abomination as a judge, and also Johnny Dock. Johnny Dock is the big union leader in Philadelphia. His brother Doherty was also Supreme Court justice. At least those two are. I mean, they're corrupt. That's what they are. And as far as Fetterman goes, have you ever met John Fetterman?
Not personally, no.
I've met him a couple of times. You know me, I'm a pretty big guy, right?
Yeah.
That's one of the few people that makes me feel small. I mean, he's literally a head taller than I am, and he's at least 6 inches more broad than I am. The man is huge. He's just absolutely huge. Anyways, yeah. So the redistricting is going on in Texas, and the funny part about it is all the Democrats yelling and screaming and wailing and gnashing of their teeth for the same thing they've done for the last 20 years. But anyways, when Republicans do it, it's wrong. So we were going to talk about, what do you want to talk about next? The missiles, the
Uh,
hospital.
yeah, let's hit the missiles that Trump sent over to Ukraine. So there were 3,350 of them, extended range. Um, so theoretically, they can hit inside Russia and they can be air launched, right? So the thing that bothers me is ever since Biden and others were in charge, they can't use those missiles inside Russian territory unless we give approval. Now, there's certain areas that we've already given like blanket approval for, like Crimea and other areas. But in order for, I just don't understand how Russia can invade a country and we as America put some kind of restriction on how deep inside Russia you can retaliate because they're afraid of escalation. Escalation, it's a joke. It's escalated as far as it can. I mean, they're throwing missiles into Kiev and near the border of Poland all the time. I mean, they're reaching as far into Ukraine as they want. I just don't get it, Mac. What do you think's up with that?
Well, here's the thing. I think there's so many different influences in this war. Trump, President Trump is fond of saying if he had been president, there never would have been a war. And I think at least to some level that's accurate. Because you remember the troops were lining up outside the Ukrainian border for months before they actually invaded.
Yep.
And I think that Donald Trump would have done something to forestall or, eliminate the threat from Russia invading Ukraine. As we know, President Biden and his administration didn't do anything. And when he was asked the question, what do we do if Russia invades Ukraine? And his answer, this is paraphrasing, of course, was something along the lines of, well, that depends on how much territory they take from Ukraine, which is a tacit approval Russia invading and taking some amount of territory, right?
Yep.
So that was a problem to begin with. But The war has been prosecuted for a number of years now, a few years now, and the previous administration, the Biden administration, did virtually nothing to stop the war, simply kept paying for weapons for Ukraine, whether they were offensive or defensive weapons. They just kept giving them money. Some of that money, by the way, I personally believe was misused or maybe even fraudulently stolen from the war effort. I don't know exactly that we can put a because the accounting for that money has been atrocious. So recently, Donald Trump took a different approach, and what he did was he forced the European Union nations, that is the NATO nations that are part of, or the European nations that are part of NATO, to up their commitment to NATO from 3% to 5% of GDP. That meant more money for NATO. And then he negotiated NATO buying the weapons from the United States to give to Ukraine under the guise of the United States has already paid enough. And oh, by the way, this is really a European war, and the Europeans have much more to gain by Ukraine acting as a buffer between their nations and Russia than the United States does. So that's really a different aspect of this. The NATO nations of European heritage that are paying money for these weapons. That therein lies the over 3,000 long-range missiles that you mentioned. They're being paid for by NATO, by European NATO partners, allies, which is different than what the Biden administration. The third aspect of it, I think, that is kind of personal, but also very much part of diplomatic policy, foreign policy. As you know, Donald Trump had Putin recently he hosted an event, a meeting in Alaska. Putin being on American soil for this meeting, I think, was a political diplomatic victory for the United States, because now Putin has to come to America to have this meeting, because they were talked about doing it in several different places, Geneva or France or other places they were going to possibly have it, neutral sites, if you will. Anyways, Putin came to Alaska, and did you see how coincidentally, obviously, two B-2 bombers and four fighters flew over when Putin got out of his plane to meet with Donald Trump? That was certainly a subtle, if not a very direct message to President Putin. We've got weapons we haven't used, Mr. President, and you may want to pay attention to that. So they had this meeting and nothing got done. And of course, there was a lot of hue and cry and criticism of Donald Trump. Oh, all he did, he's selling out Ukraine and coddling up to Putin. Well, since that meeting, Putin has escalated the war in Ukraine. More missiles, more often, more power, more destruction in a concentrated period of time than was done immediately preceding the meeting that they had. But also, Donald Trump put what he called secondary tariffs on the nation of India. I don't know if you're aware of that, but he put another 25% tariffs on all goods coming from India to the United States, because what he said was India should stop buying oil from Russia, because the buying of oil from Russia was only giving Russia the money that they needed to prosecute the war in Ukraine. So these are all aspects of what's going on in Ukraine and why there will or won't be a ceasefire and or a peace accord. But what Donald Trump has asked consistently, and what I don't understand why other people are not jumping on this bandwagon, is why can't there be a ceasefire? Why can't we just stop killing people? Because there's literally been hundreds of thousands, if not more than 1 million, killed, counting casualties on both sides, killed in the Ukraine-Russia war. Do we care about human life or not? Because right now, if you look at the map, the territory that Russia has taken over, they've pretty much done what they wanted. If you remember, under the Obama administration, they took the territory of Crimea. You mentioned Crimea. Crimea is important to Russia because it's a warm water port. It's a port that they can get products in and export products out of Russia, even during the worst winters. And that's important to them. So what Russia has done is in effect, they built a land bridge between Russia and Crimea, the territory they previously took over under the Obama administration, without a shot being fired, by the way. Um, and now they've secured access and egress to Crimea, to the port that they needed, they believe, for their economic, if not national security. So there's so many aspects of this escalation and these weapons and this war. And Mike, I'm at this point in time, I want to say two things about this war, and I've been I've been consistent. I don't want one American to die in that war. We don't have a national interest in Ukraine. The United States does not have a national interest in Ukraine. I don't want one American life lost there. The second part of it is that I want, as much as we can influence it, the death and destruction to cease. And I think all civilized nations of the world have a stake in whether or not there is indiscriminate loss of life anywhere in the world. We should all be against that. Do you have something specific about the situation there in Ukraine?
Yeah, the original question I asked. What do you think about that?
Well, all those things I said were things that I think about that. And I think my bottom line is the same as Trump's. Let's stop the fighting. Let's stop the killing.
No, my question had nothing to do with what was just discussed. My question was, why do you think it is that America says that we don't want them hitting inside Russian territory for fear of escalation? In other words, it's escalated as far as it's going to escalate. The Russians have been hitting inside Ukraine since the beginning. So why do you think it is politically or philosophically that we are putting any kind of restriction on how deep the Ukrainians can hit inside of Russia?
I got two questions to ask you, and your answers to these two questions will give us the answer as to why we have control of how far or how deep we allow attacks into Russia.
Okay.
One question is, what nation on the globe has the most nuclear weapons?
Russia.
Okay. Second question, if we allow people who aren't as, let's say, steady at the controls, or let's say are not concerned about mutually assured destruction as the United States is, if we let those kinds of people have control of long range weapons that can attack deep into Russia, at what point does Russia say, we're going to lose this war, and if we're going to lose, we're going to take everybody else with us?
Well, if that's the case, then Ukraine's already defeated.
Mike, I told you 3 years ago Ukraine was already defeated.
Well,
there was no way Ukraine was going to.
Okay, so I don't necessarily agree. The reason I say I don't agree is we look historically at many wars, Afghanistan and Russia, Afghanistan and the United States, Vietnam. We look at these wars where the superpowers of the world were completely exhausted to the point where they just gave up and said, we just can't sustain this any longer.
But Mike,
So,
none of those nations you're talking about have nuclear weapons.
well, no, but the
My only
point,
point is,
okay, point one is, in my opinion, the war is not, by stopping Ukraine from hitting inside of Russia, we're declaring that because nuclear weapons could be used by Russia, that the Ukrainian war is over. And if that's the case, let's just give Ukraine to Russia. Just give it to them. Just stop funding it and just come out and say what you just said. Look, Russia has nukes. We can't fight against a country that has nukes.
The political reality of it, Mike, is that all those nations bordering Ukraine are NATO nations, and they don't want Russia as a neighbor, because they fear the same thing that's happening to Ukraine would happen to them next. So our NATO allies would be violently against just giving Ukraine away. My only point, Mike, is the specific question you asked is, why should America have any influence about how those 3,300 missiles, long range missiles, are used. And my answer to that, in the early 1980s, the fall of the Berlin Wall and the breakup of the of Russia's satellite nations, what was the USSR, United Soviet Socialist Republic, um, the nation of Ukraine had the most nuclear weapons of any of those nations in the USSR. The United States of America asked Ukraine to give up those nuclear weapons because that was remember, that's the front. Ukraine was the border between NATO and what was then Russia. So Russia wanted those nuclear weapons in Ukraine in case NATO decided to attack. So we asked, but then we forced Ukraine to give up their nuclear weapons. And what we said was, don't worry about it. If Russia tries to do anything, we'll defend you. Now, that's netting out a whole lot of history into very short sentences, but basically, paraphrasing, that's what we promised the Ukrainians. No, we lied to them because we let them take Crimea without doing anything. We let them do other things in the border. But here's you specifically asked me. No, we're not going to just give all the territory of Ukraine to Russia because of our NATO allies, and also because Russia would then just ask for more. My point about the 3,350 long-range missiles is that if Ukraine and our NATO allies does too much damage to too many important targets deep within the nation of Russia, they might think their only retaliatory option is nuclear war. And let's not mistake this, Mike. If you understand the geography of Russia, the land mass that they have is huge. But the territory where there are people and infrastructure and buildings, and that's relatively small given the size of the land mass of the nation. So we're not going to be shooting into we're not going to be shooting into the great, vast, unwashed, frozen tundra of Russia. They're going to be shooting into targets that have high visibility, high value, that have weapons, that have infrastructure. You know, it's not it's not just the weapons that you want to take out. It's the gas and oil and electricity infrastructure. And if we our allies, because it wouldn't be America if we didn't have veto authority over the targets, if they start taking out all of Russia's infrastructure, which is really concentrated in that nation, despite the size of their nation, they might get to the point where they say, all is lost, let's push the button. And that mutually assured destruction, if they think they're already going to lose, Mike, if they're already convinced that they've lost, why not take everybody else with them? And therein lies the reason why we're giving up those missiles with the veto authority of who and what can be targeted.
Well, my thought is if this is the accurate way that everyone thinks, if the people in the United States see, I'm not sure Trump won't allow a deeper push because most of this was controlled by the Biden administration. The fear of escalation to me is absurd because if that means if you could never have a war, we can't defend Taiwan or anything because China has nukes too. So if a country has nukes, you can't really go to war with them. You can't defend yourself against them for fear that they might use those nukes. I don't think, okay, so I understand your point of view, and you can say it over and over again.
I think there may be times when we have to use nuclear weapons, and I pray that that day never comes. But I think we're prepared for that, Mike, although we don't want it.
Well, I think that it's absolutely absurd for the United States if what your view is what our political and military view is, it's absurd to send one more dollar to Ukraine. Not even one more dollar. Because
Yeah, but see, we're not sending the dollars. Europe is sending the dollars. We're
Well,
sending the
we're
missiles.
saying, yeah, I mean, but even sell missiles because we might need those missiles to defend ourselves someday. Um, the point is, if this is over, it's really truly over because Russia has nukes. We should have never spent $1 in the beginning. What your conclusion is something that the smarter people at the Pentagon should have seen right away and said, well, Russia has nukes. We shouldn't get involved because Russia could eventually use them. To me, it makes it's there's no logic in that for me.
I'm not arguing the strategist at the Pentagon. I'm arguing Donald Trump.
Well, whether it's Donald Trump, I think he's a smart guy. I think he's going to
But Mike,
allow deeper penetration into Russia over Biden.
Mike, how much territory, how much aggressive action took place by Russia and Putin during Donald Trump's first term?
Of course, none.
Did the North Koreans stop shooting missiles over South Korea during the first Donald Trump
Yes.
administration? When Crimea was lost and Georgia was lost and all those other territories were lost to Russian aggression, Donald Trump was not president.
No, it was Obama.
When Donald Trump was president, there was no aggressive military action. Do you not recall that Donald Trump said many times he's not interested? When Israel attacked Iran, were Americans involved in that war? Not until every anti aircraft battery and every Iranian aircraft was neutralized did American B 2 bombers go and drop bombs, bunker busting bombs on the Iranian nuclear facilities. There was no danger of American lives being lost. Do you think Donald Trump wants to take any action that includes Americans losing their lives? Do you believe that? Or do you believe Donald Trump does not want to lose American lives?
Well, of course he does. You know, he
Okay.
wants to minimum. He may
So,
come to the
so
point where he has to, but he's
well, now
like
wait a
me
minute.
and you. He doesn't want to see anyone die, not us or anyone else.
Before you get to the point of saying, unless we have to, Donald Trump has demonstrated, has proven by his previous actions that he will do whatever it takes to enforce his agenda, his foreign policy, but not losing American lives, right? Is that a fair and accurate statement?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So what he's doing right now is economic war, right? He's putting pressure on Russia on their oil and gas. He's putting pressure on secondary nations that do business with Russia. He's brought the price of oil down significantly. What do we know about Russia's ability? Who was it, McCain that said Russia is a gas station with nuclear weapons?
Yep.
What do we know about Russia? The way their economy is almost entirely attached to the price of oil. Price of oil at $100 a barrel or more, and Putin's making money, he can do what he wants. Well, guess what? When we drop the price of a barrel of oil to $60, Russia's not making money anymore. If they don't have money from their oil sales, if we put pressure on other nations to not buy oil from them, what is Russia going to? They're going pretty soon. They're not going to have any money to buy weapons. So again, it's not that I doubt the strategists of the Pentagon. What I believe is, based on Donald Trump's actions in the past, he will do everything necessary so that American blood and treasure is not lost in a war that doesn't need to happen. Not that wars don't need to happen, and not that we need to be afraid of the Russian nuclear weapons, because we've got our own and we've got ways of defending ourselves against those. And what's he doing now? He's trying to get money for what he called it, the Golden Dome, so that no missile can get through to him. So my point is that I trust Donald Trump, but I know from his experience, from my experience with him, I know what he's done in the past. He's exceedingly patient and he lets other people lose lives, not America. And that's what I think he's doing here. And that's why I think that your criticism of America having authority over where those missiles are used, or veto authority at the very least, is a prudent part of Donald Trump's overall diplomatic foreign policy. I understand how you're hamstringing the military planners and military fighters over in Europe. I get it. And I understand why that's a problem. I get that too. But what I'm saying is what Donald Trump is doing is, I believe, in America's best interest. Not that he doesn't care about our European NATO allies, not that he doesn't care about Ukraine, but he cares about you. What's his policy called? America first. That's what
Yeah.
he's.
So anyway, we're down to about 9 minutes, and so my final thought on that is, sure, I'm all for using these economic measures, but at the same time, if Russia's going to launch nuclear weapons, they could launch it for the reason of being economically crushed and saying, well, this is our last ditch hope. I'll just end it there. But you brought in the United States and Israel and Iran. You had mentioned earlier about the hospital that was hit by Israel twice. I looked that up, and after you mentioned it to me, and I know it took a couple days for Netanyahu to come out and say anything about it. And they didn't really give a good explanation, except IDF forces recognized some kind of camera that Hamas was using, I think, near the hospital. Now, what that camera was being used for, I don't know. Maybe intel or whatever. So they didn't come right out and say that's what they were trying to hit, but it was sort of intimated in their response. And of course, Europe and everybody else, the United Nations, is up in arms. But I guess I'm a little bit more cold-hearted. I want to use bad language right now. I want to say, F it. I don't care that journalists were killed. I don't care if some civilians were killed, 7 terrorists were killed, but some civilians, and it was a hospital. And that's supposed to be a big no-no. But you tell me again how Hamas could just launch missiles willy-nilly into Israel as well as Iran and all these other countries and hit playgrounds and dwelling areas. And the world is going to be up in arms because Israel hits a hospital one time, or maybe a church, or a mosque or something on occasion. When they just threw volleys and volleys of missiles hitting everything they could, anything. There's no targeting. Matter of fact, back to Russia real quick, their missiles suck. You know, I don't know that they could launch an accurate missile strike. They keep hitting stuff that they keep making excuses for and killing all these civilians. It's like they can't hit military targets. They're not that accurate. My God, America is amazing. Our ability to target precisely is incredible. But back to my main point, I have no sympathy for Hamas or anything that happens to the people in Gaza. Sorry.
Well, I have a couple of conflicting opinions on that. First you brought Russia back into it. I'll just say this about Russia. I don't believe Russia uses nuclear weapons in economic war. I just don't think they do that. I think they use they use nuclear weapons when their entire life is being destroyed. If it's economic warfare, you can do certain things to mitigate that and you can recover from it. But if you use nuclear weapons, it's most difficult to recover from that. But let's go back to the hospital. For the most part, Israel controls Gaza. They control everything that is there. When you have air superiority, when you have artillery superiority, when you have missile superiority, and you have ground superiority, you are in control of the theater of operations. There are many ways in which they could have taken out those terrorists. The way that they should not have done it was missiles that killed innocent civilians and journalists. The United States, as well as all of our allies, have long held that life is important, especially those that belong to ourselves, our nation, and our allies. Not everyone thinks that way. Obviously, the terrorists don't think that way. But my point is that when they threw missiles and they hit that hospital and they killed innocent civilians and they killed journalists, there were other. Now they didn't know that that was going to be the outcome. Obviously, that's collateral damage that they wish did not happen. I'm sure of that. I'm sure that Israel wished that the collateral damage of those individuals did not occur. But my point is that yes, they have to prosecute the war, and I agree with you that Hamas must be eliminated. What's their charter? Their charter says death to Israel, death to America. I mean, you can't negotiate peace with people who say death is all I want from you. But there were other options, Mike, and it took them 2 days to even issue an apology for what happened. Um, I don't disagree that they have to go after the terrorists. I do disagree with the terrorists, and I also disagree with their almost callous evaluation of what happened. We don't. We try hard in our wars to not kill innocent civilians. I only know a couple of circumstances where that, the My Lai massacre in Vietnam comes to mind. I'm sure there are a couple others that I've forgotten. But America doesn't fight that way, Mike. We don't. We hold ourselves and our allies to a higher standard. That's what we do. So I'm disappointed. I think that Israel had many options to attack that, and they chose the one that was turned out to be the most egregious, turned out to be the most, you know, casualties that collateral damage were involved, and I would criticize them for that.
Well, all I can say is America is and should be very happy that I am not in charge of prosecuting any war because I am like President Trump in that I don't want anyone to die. I'm a Christian. If I could find a way to peace, I would find a way to peace. I don't really believe in the Geneva Convention. I think it's a bunch of crap
Wow.
because the opponents we have in the world don't go by the same rules,
Yeah.
and you're tying one hand behind your back. And
True.
when you have when you live by a moral code like we do, we end up putting our troops in jeopardy. If you're going to, and I can feel it in my stomach, Mac. If you get into a fight with me, I don't care how big or bad you are, if you got nuclear weapons, I'm going to do the best I can. I'm going to end this. I'm going to go out swinging, even if it means the end of my life or the end of the world. And that's just the way I'm built. You
Well,
know, just pray to
well,
God.
I
Pray to
think the
God
world,
I never get in charge of any of this.
I think the world is worth saving, and I think Donald Trump believes that too. So I don't believe he will make decisions that have the potential of hastening an all-out nuclear war. I think that he recognizes, as well as our strategists in the Pentagon, as well as all of our European and allies throughout the world, that a nuclear war is a bad thing for everybody involved. So,
Well, I'm not sure the Russians would want to commit suicide because that's
no,
exactly what they would do.
but Mike, my only point is if the war affects them in a way that they look around them and say, the war is already lost, that we are never going to be in power again, that because of their ways of thinking, which are different than ours, they just might choose the mutually assured destruction as far as them being the only nation that was destroyed, or their economic and political system being the only one that was destroyed. I believe that. The Russians think differently than we do. They're very fatalistic. Remember World War II? As they were retreating from the Germans, they burned and killed everything that they left behind
Yep.
so the Germans wouldn't have any kind of local assistance in any way. Yeah, that's how the Russians think, Mike. We don't think that way.
Well, I guess we're going to have to end it there because we're under a minute.
Well,
And
we
so,
didn't get to some of the topics we wanted to. We'll have to save them for later. But
yep,
in
we
the
can
meantime,
catch up on Friday maybe.
I guess it's time for us to say Mac and Mike.
Out.